Prepare to experience the strongest radio allowable by law. Secrets will be revealed. Myths dispelled. From the studio gym where excuses never apply, it's Superhuman Radio with your host, Carl Lenore.
Welcome back to another episode of Superhuman Radio. Today is August 27th. The month is coming to a close. We have a great show planned today. We're going to talk about two important things. We're going to talk about 5G, which is on a lot of people's minds today. And there's a lot of misinformation about 5G out there. We're going to talk about that. And then later in the show, we're going to talk about a study that was just published out of Australia that showed that there was significant amounts of plastic in just about every type of fish that they tested. And this is worrisome. Because plastic has the ability to bioaccumulate in the body. So we're going to talk about that a little bit later in the show. But first, we have to thank our title sponsor, Legendary Foods. EatLegendary.com is the website. The code is SHR10. Save 10% off everything at their website. They have new flavors of the Tasty Pastry coming out. I've gotten a glimpse of some of them. They're insane. The Tasty Pastry is basically a Pop-Tart that's been cleaned up. So if you're a low-carb, keto kind of person or a high protein person, this will help you stay in your dietary lane because the Tasty Pastry has 9 grams of high quality, high leucine protein, less than 1 gram of sugar. So it's really a good snack. And it's even good for your kids when they start going back to school. Check it out. Go to eatlegendary.com. Use the code SHR10 for 10% off your entire order. And now, without further delay, I will bring my guest on. And that is Robyn Tanguay. I'm sorry, I want to pronounce it right. How you doing, Robyn?
I'm good. How are you, Carl?
Wonderful, wonderful. So this is a very interesting study. I'm sure that you have to be somewhat frustrated about all the misinformation out there today about 5G. Everything from it's designed to be a sinister way to control the population. It's causing COVID-19 and all the other silliness that surrounds it. Why did you feel compelled to do this study? What preceded this research that you felt compelled?
It's a great question. So we work a lot with companies that are developing new technologies, and so we don't work with the companies. We really want to evaluate for the public whether or not there might be a health risk from adoption of new technology. We work heavily, for example, in nanomaterials, and there's a lot of concern with nano. So we try to really do sound science to investigate these new technologies. So certainly I read the literature and the newspapers like you do, and all the studies associating, if you look at a headline, strongly associating this technology with an array of adverse health effects. And when I read the literature, it just, there were challenges and maybe biases in some of the reports. And it seemed obvious to me that what's missing is a systematic platform to evaluate in an unbiased way whether or not this technology, these frequencies interact with biology to produce harm. And so we have a lot of experience of using the system that we developed to ask those types of questions. So we weren't trying to disprove any one person's study or a group of studies or support it. We really want to go very unbiased, do really sound science that we're known for, and let's see what the data tells us. So that was our motivation.
So why now this study was done on zebrafish. What's the significance of using zebrafish? And if I'm correct, these were kind of like zebrafish embryos, right? They weren't adult zebrafish, right?
Yeah, exactly. That's intentional. So I kind of started this field about 20 years ago as a postdoc, and when you want to identify whether a chemical or an agent is active and able to affect biology, you need to test in a system where all the potential components of biology are present and active. And the only time in human life or in zebrafish or elephants or giraffes, the only time where the entire genome, everything that drives biology, is present and active is during early development. And so I coined this phrase that using zebrafish as a biosensor. So what happens if a chemical or in this case a frequency can interact with specific activities or targets during development, it'll disrupt them. And the consequence of disruption is evident in performance of the animal, development of the animal. So it's absolutely the most sensitive period to detect exposures from the environment, including radio frequencies, and observing an effect is during development. And I would say that would be the case for rodents as well. That would be the best time, but it's so challenging to do these studies in rodents because, they're mammals like humans, and, development occurs within the mother. So you have that other parameter, maternal impact on the embryo. Zebrafish, you can completely control the study. You can do your exposures in a very small volume, very shallow water in this case, and you can observe them in real time, non-invasively. So you can tell whether or not the heart is forming, the brain is forming, the rest of the cardiovascular system, the spleen, the kidney. You can see all of this with your with a microscope, with your naked eye. So it really gives you a window into looking at developmental consequences of any exposure. So it's really a powerful system.
Now water attenuates RF, right? So
right.
Obviously you have to compensate. If you want to deliver a certain amount of energy to these embryos, you have to compensate for the water, right?
That's correct, and we thought of that, of course. And so these embryos are really small. They're less than 1 millimeter in diameter early in life, so they're really, really tiny, and you could put a large number of them in a very small area, and then you can control the depth of the water. I mean, just barely covering the surface. So there's just enough water to maintain the viability of the embryos, but there should be very little attenuation. And we actually calculated the attenuation is minuscule with the depth. And that's some of the challenges with some of the other studies, not to mention the differences in wavelength, but the depth of the water wasn't controlled. And so really, we wanted to absolutely nail down all the experimental variables we could. So we're just investigating frequencies interacting with very well-conserved complex biology.
Interesting. Now, there are studies out there that have been done in situ with rodents, such as the one that was done by the United Arab Emirates, I want to say about maybe 8 or 9 years ago, where they took 900 megahertz cell phones in the standby mode and exposed male rodents to them for 8 hours a day, and it actually damaged sperm motility. There is a study we talked about a year and a half ago on the show, that looked at the effects of RF on cilia of the heart that is implicated in idiopathic mitral valve prolapse. So we know RF has the ability to do things to tissue, right? That's not what you weren't looking to validate or invalidate that, right?
That's correct. And I would say even in those cases, I think what's still missing is the biological mechanism, even for those observed effects that you've talked about. And you could also bring up the National Toxicology Program with the cancer outcomes from 2018. And some of these observations, I'm not discounting that they happen, but I'm much more comfortable when I can explain the phenomenon. So I like to tell my group here is there's no magic. There is no magic in biology. There's no magic in interactions of 5G with biology. There is an explanation. We just have to figure it out. And you're right. I was just trying to create a study where we could, if we observe an effect, we have a whole toolbox of ways to explain the mechanism by which it happens. And those systems, as you described, they really don't. And so then they become, and I don't want to dismiss them, they become kind of phenomenological.
Right.
And you can't do much with phenomenon.
Right. If you can't identify the pathway, the mechanism of action, then there's no real tie to that. It's corollary at that point in time.
That's correct. And you imagine if we could understand the mechanism, maybe there are subtleties, and there's some suggestions in the literature that there's certain patterns of wavelengths or durations of the exposures that it's kind of the sweet spot that produces adverse effects from those interactions. If we could really understand that, then maybe we could, in the deployment of the technology, we could either shield against those, that's one example, or create the waves in a way that are still functional for the performance, but but maximally protect biology. So there's a lot of value of understanding why things happen.
Now, and you close your study with saying that the most exciting thing about this study is we have now created this environment that we can manipulate and we can control, and we can test other frequencies. All these different frequencies seem to have their own unique characteristics, all the way up to ionizing radiation and below. Now, you looked at 5G, but you looked at a type of 5G that's more popular here in the United States than, say, in China. Right, the frequency was lower. It's like 3.5 gigs, right?
Correct.
So talk about that. I mean, 5G is a technology specific term. It speaks specifically to telephony. You know what I mean? In RF, we just call this, we would call it 6 gigahertz or 3.5 gigahertz. But 5G has a lot of meanings, right? It could be anything from 3.5 all the way up to 60 gigahertz.
That's correct. That's correct. Yeah, and exactly. That's why that even reinforces why we need to have a system that could, in the same biological platform, evaluate just the consequence of changing the frequency or the pattern or the cycling. So it has to be able to be done efficiently, directly at those wavelengths that you determined, that you just suggested. And again, it becomes prohibitively expensive to really do these studies in these higher organisms, to really get at the impact of modulating the frequencies. So we're working with Dr. Liu here in our engineering department, and he works in a microwave laboratory. So that we have FCC license here. We can span all of that. So we can span that in a continuous or pulsing. And so we now have the capability with this collaboration to deploy all of those potential frequencies in this system. And then be able to directly say, well, when we're in the 3.5, we don't see much, but maybe when we're at 8 or 12 or 22.4, we see something different. And we can do these studies honestly in days. So we could test one experimental frequency setup and measure the impact literally in 5 days. And so it's a vertebrate that has the complexity that parallels humans. So that's why we're real excited. I think we're going to be able to fill in a massive data gap in this field.
So talk about the study. So what exactly did you do, and what were you looking for specifically, and what did you learn?
Yeah, exactly. Great question. So what we were looking for is, so we know from human development and certainly our work in zebrafish that in zebrafish, the first 2 days of life, from 0 to 48 hours, all of the organs, it's called organogenesis. So all the organs are formed. So from a single cell, just like in human development, after fertilization, you start with one cell and the cells divide and they change into different cell types. So all those initial organs, all of the really amazing complex, there are trillions of interactions that happen in order to go from a single cell to this animal that has every organ, heart, spleen, kidney, like I said earlier. So we wanted to probe specifically those processes. And again, they're well conserved. So that's why we stopped our study when we did. We wanted to maximally expose these at a continuous frequency when they're most sensitive to any insults. Okay, so that was the study design. And then what we look at, then we stop. So, there's some complexity. We have to do these in this FCC approved building on campus. So we do the exposures there, and then we bring it back to my laboratory where we do all the assessments. And the short answer is we look for anything. We look for anything that's different from our control animals that were not exposed to any of these RF exposures at all. So we look for things like, do the animals develop the heart at the same time? Does it look okay? Does an animal have a touch response? Does the animal have a heart rate? Does the animal able to swim? Does the animal be able to use its gills like the lungs? So we measure everything, and we've automated all of that in my lab about a decade ago. So we have very high confidence that if we saw any adverse effects, we would see them. And so we've evaluated tens of thousands of chemicals. For example, you think about dioxins that I mentioned, nanomaterials, and we know that incredibly low concentrations of some of these really toxic chemicals, our zebrafish tell us with unequivocally, these compounds are highly toxic. And we create all of these effects that we measure are impacted. So we know the window of susceptibility is correct. So now the question is, do we see anything? So that was the main study design. And we also added some assessments of behavior. So again, the study design is, what is the impact of this exposure when all these structures are being formed? And then we take away the frequencies, and then we observe the consequence. It's different than some studies like you described where the exposures might be continuous and in an adult, for example. So there is no development really in an adult. So now you're asking questions in those studies, what are the impacts of these frequencies when these structures your organs are just doing their everyday function?
Right.
And those are much less sensitive generally than development.
So there was a study about 10 years ago, and you may recall this, I'm sure you are familiar with it, that looked at mirror neurons in the brains of rodents that were exposed to RF.
Right.
And mirror neurons are attributed, they're early stage neurons after birth that allow a child to look up at its mother is smiling at it, and the child proprioceptively puts together a smile and smiles back. It literally knows that what it feels on its face is mimicking what its mother's doing. And those mirror neurons go away as the child ages. I have a theory about people who can do impressions of other people really well. I think that they have mirror neurons that stick around.
They hang on to them.
Yeah, but I remember that study was showed that the fetal exposure to back then was just 900 megahertz seemed to disrupt the formation of these mirror neurons, and they were postulating that this could be part of the whole spectrum that we see with children.
Yeah, perhaps. And it's so hard. That's another example, right? We can't explain it. And so when folks do those studies, if they need additional studies to understand how does that happen, and more carefully dissecting the initial interaction of those frequencies on those population of cells, and what do they do? And typically there's got to be a molecular switch that explains it. And I think they and we need to figure that out.
Interesting. So what did you learn? 11 minutes before we take a break. What did you learn? What did you see in these zebrafish that you could conclusively point to the exposure to the RF as being a component of?
Yeah, so first I'll say that we had no preconceived ideas of what we were going to see. So we knew that biology was a great platform to investigate this, and we had really good, we built a really nice testing platform. So what we found was maybe surprising, is we saw no evidence. We looked at 22 separate measures in these offspring. We saw no evidence of effect on eye development or brain development or the body axis formation. We saw literally nothing in these 22 endpoints that we typically measure in our system. Well, and then when we looked at two different behavioral assessments, where we look at similar to what you described with those neurons in people, there's neurons that are formed really early in life in zebrafish, and they drive this behavior that we call the larval photomotor response. It's actually, we have no time to talk about that, but it's really fascinating that these neurons, they drive the spontaneous motion early in life, and then within 2 days, the neurons that drive that go away. So humans don't have those neurons, but zebrafish do. So we and colleagues of mine have shown that lots of chemicals that affect human behavior affect that particular behavior. Even those neurons die in zebrafish. So that tells you that the fundamental molecules or the genes that are driving those behaviors are the same genes that do something else in humans. So we looked at that activity, and that was not affected, and that's a really sensitive endpoint for chemical perturbations. We also looked at behaviors that respond to a transition of light and dark when they're 5 days of age, so that the animals look at the light, and if it's really bright, they tend not to move. And then when you turn the lights off, they swim a lot. It's called a photomotor response. So we use that routinely. We use millions of animals a year in that assay, and that was completely normal. So that was good to see, I guess. And then finally, we had another assay to see whether or not the animals responded to an acoustic startle. So say when you're going fishing and you go across the bank and the fish hear your vibrations and they run away and you can't catch the fish. It's kind of the same thing. we can startle the fish, and so now they'll respond by moving quickly. It's kind of a safety mechanism. And so they use their ears, and they have the lateral lines along their body, so they move, and then we measure how far they move as a consequence. So that rules out a possibility that animals can't see, right? They don't need to see that, they feel it. And we saw a very subtle effect. We did observe a statistical effect on the startle response from that 2-day continuous exposure to 3.5 gigahertz. And so my postdoc, the lead author, Dr. Shubham Dasgupta, he's focusing heavily on that right now. And in fact, there are a bunch of additional studies that we could talk about later that we plan to do, even with these fish, not to mention what we said earlier.
When you say these fish, you mean these fish that already went through this phase of exposure? Oh, how interesting. Yeah, that's going to be interesting.
Yeah, so we're able to, after the exposures, we run it through our battery of evaluations, and then we can raise them up to adulthood. And then we built a number of instruments in our laboratory that actually can probe really complex behaviors that you'd be surprised. Many people don't realize that fish can show anxiety-like behaviors. They can show antisocial behaviors. You think of the autism type spectrum, like you hinted before. We can measure those phenotypes in this lab. We can look at effects on learning, memory, in an automated way. And so we're going to be evaluating these fish for these very subtle effects from a developmental exposure producing these long-lasting effects. So
very interesting.
Those studies will be done in a couple months.
So the exposure level to these fish, is it somehow correlate to real world exposure that we have on a day in and day out basis with our cell phones?
Yeah, that's I don't think you can really define what that is, right? So we're all different. And I think there's a spectrum of exposures that individuals are exposed to. So as you know, certainly. So, if you happen to be really near a tower with a, high intensity antenna, certainly the energy is there, the frequencies, the power is going to be a lot higher. And that drops off precipitously when you're farther away. And maybe we'll have time later to talk about this. Is why Dr. Liu and I talked. The reason why these got together is, in addition to this particular wavelength range, we certainly are exposed simultaneously to lots of other frequencies. And nobody is in a position to evaluate the combinatorial effect of all those frequencies. But I think we can do it. So we have a fantastic laboratory. So say you start intertwining these 5G range frequencies with the lower frequencies and modulate them in kind of almost like a mixtures effect.
It's called constructive interference in the RF industry.
That's right.
I own a spectrum analyzer specifically because I wanted to show my listeners one day the soup of RF that we exist in. And what happens is you have generally an odd numbers. You have third, fifth, seventh harmonics where you'll have these three frequencies collide, and they create a residual frequency that is different than the three input frequencies. And so you're right. We are being exposed to frequencies that we aren't even using yet in telephony, just because they are being manufactured when all these frequencies collide in our environment.
That's right. And to see the challenge of assessing the potential adverse effects is, depending on our environment and our density of population and cities versus rural, it varies for everybody. So getting back to that idea of we need a way to systematically evaluate those from a spectral point of view, the interactions of the waves, but then the consequences of those interactions on biological systems. So that's what we're really building towards.
It's scary to me. Like my first career was in RF. I owned a mobile telephone and paging company in Las Vegas, Nevada.
What?
And I learned a lot back then because we had to do environmental impact studies for the Bureau of Land Management back then, because we were developing sites on mountaintops like Mount Potosi and so on and so forth. And we had to hire RF engineers to generate these reports to show that with the current TV broadcast channels that were up there and the current repeaters from different commercial applications, and now the transmitter we wanted to put in, what the residual effect would be. And it's crazy. It's like you have 16 transmitters on a mountaintop, and you got 3,640 residual frequencies that are happening depending on which ones key up at the same time.
Yeah,
I mean, and now looking at it today, when I was a young man, I didn't care about that stuff, right? Now all of a sudden I'm like, wow, I carry my own personal RF transmitter with me everywhere I go. And then I have my Wi-Fi, I have my cordless phone, I've got all this other stuff. We literally live in a soup of RF, and we really don't know what impact it's having on us.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, I always thought that it would be really nice to have a visualization tool like they do. We do it in atmospheric chemistry. There are remote sensing stations, like similar to what you described, on mountaintops and on big buildings, and you can actually measure certain contaminants, and then you model those around the world. If we could do that and visualize it for a person's location, I think people would be surprised at how much they're swimming in various and variable frequencies.
It is. It's soup, because especially if you look at it on a spectrum analyzer, it's this blue cloud, and it pips here, and then it dips there, and and it's like, and it's all around you. You're being bathed in it day in and day out.
Yep.
And we really have no idea what the impact on us is. I want to take a quick commercial break.
Sure.
When we come back, I want to talk about a couple things. I want to get your feel. Now, I understand that this initial study was more a test of the concept of evaluating these types of things in a real world setting. But there are a lot of frequencies that you're yet to embark upon and look at. And so that's an exciting thing I want to talk about. The other thing I want to talk about is, what's your first blush feeling about all this? Like, I know that these zebrafish look like, hey, this was inconsequential. There really weren't anything. Was there anything at all that you thought, wow, if this gets worse with different frequencies, we could have a problem on our hands? I want to save that for when we come back. Okay.
Sounds good.
All right. Stay tuned. We'll be right back with more of Superhuman Radio. This is a fascinating discussion. Stay with us. Select Savory Snacks Original Biltong is the healthier alternative to sugar-laden beef jerky. Their sugar-free biltong is seasoned and then air-dried for up to 2 weeks, providing you with one of the most tender and flavorful meat snacks that you've ever had. They also use a fattier cut of beef, which adds to the tenderness and gives their biltong even better flavor. Select Savory Snacks Original Biltong is the perfect snack or travel companion for your busy life. Get a free meat snack sample pack with every order of $75 or more. Get yours today at selectsavory.snacks.com/SHR. Use code SHR free. Are you still on the fence about Body Protection Complex BPC Oral from drseeds.com? Listen to Maggie Kuhn, one of the owners of the C-Bus Lifting Company gym in Columbus, Ohio.
I had been having some nagging tendon issues that weren't injuries, just things that were annoying. I'm 58 years old, so just older tendon kind of issues. For us powerlifters, we really don't stop training when we have just nagging issues. We just kind of keep pushing through. And I started the BPC. What I noticed was I was doing some heavy tricep stuff that would have killed me before when I had an elbow problem, and I was able to do this with literally no pain at all.
Go to drseeds.com, drseeds.com. Use coupon code SHR and save 20% off your bottle of BPC Body Protection Complex today.
Among the easiest and most popular ways to experience the life-altering benefits of hemp, Planet Earth CBD soft gels offer fast-acting effects as they release quickly. Made in a GMP-compliant, US FDA-registered facility, you can count on Planet Earth's safe soft gels. These soft gels provide temporary relief from pain and so much more. Manufactured with the calming combination of chamomile and melatonin, you got yourself a long-needed CBD solution. 25 milligrams of nano-emulsified hemp extract per serving with anti-inflammatory agency. Planet Earth sleep-supporting soft gels will have you forgetting about today's worries for a better tomorrow. Unwind with Planet Earth CBD today.
Did you know that your gut is referred to as your second brain? In fact, at least 90% of your serotonin, your happiness chemical, is created in your gut. If you don't take care of your gut, you won't feel good, period. Bioptimizers recently released Cognibiotics, a new breakthrough probiotic formula that is clinically proven to enhance your brain function, your mood, and overall mental health. Most probiotics often include conflicting strains or quantities and can cancel each other out. Cognibiotics delivers the exact strain you need in exactly the right ratios and quantities. With a 365-day, no questions asked, money-back guarantee, you can try them out for yourself to start feeling the incredible difference Cognibiotics makes in your mood, mind, and performance. For an exclusive offer to my listeners, go to cognibiotics.com/SHR. That's COGNIBIOTICS.com/SHR and use code SHR10. Everybody wants to feel better, be healthier, and happier. If you don't sweat profusely on a regular basis, you won't feel as good as you could. Studies have shown the power of infrared sauna. Infrared penetrates 1 to 2 inches into the body. It helps those with back pain, fibromyalgia, arthritis, depression, and anxiety. Patients get relief from infrared sauna. The Good Health Sauna has been shown to be an exercise mimetic, conveying many of the same benefits as cardio. There are a lot of reasons people buy a Good Health Sauna, but the bottom line is you will be a much happier, healthier person by using the Good Health Sauna every day. You'll crave it, you'll love it, and it will be the best purchase you have ever made. Good Health Saunas provide commercial-grade saunas for in-home and commercial use, backed by the best lifetime warranty in the industry. Unmatched customer service and the best financing makes owning one easy and will fit any budget. Go to goodhealthsauna.com/superhumanradio to learn more and save 25% off. Over 11 million people in the U.S. have some form of retinal damage, also known as macular degeneration. This is expected to double to nearly 22 million by 2050. Artificial blue light, age, type 2 diabetes are all contributors. Doctors say there's no cure. Armed is changing that opinion. In one clinical trial, 93% of patients had arrested or improved their condition. 54% reported lessening of glare, reduced dryness, and improved clarity and comfort. And 0% felt worse during treatment and no side effects. Take control of your macular degeneration or keep it from ever occurring. Go to wisechoicemedicine.com and get armed today.
This is the Superhuman Channel, where we use oxygen for the power of good.
Welcome back to Superhuman Radio. We're talking with Robyn Tanguay. Robyn, you're with the University of Oregon, right?
I'm at Oregon State University.
Oregon State. I'm sorry. I want to give it the appropriate.
Yeah, there are enemies of the North here.
Are they really? Yeah, there's a little rivalry.
Quite a rivalry.
Good.
Yeah.
So, this is really exciting because what you've really done is created a platform to analyze with specific metrics the effects of RF in general. So this isn't just confined to just 5G, right? This is you can do any frequencies you want and see what the outcomes are, because I predict that there's going to be frequencies that go wonky on things and some that don't.
Yeah, exactly. And so talking to Dr. Liu, we talked about that. Our initial conversations is we wanted to start one study just as a proof of a demonstration concept. I think that's what you're referring to, and that's what we've done here. So we took the new exposure control of engineering and plugged it into our really long track record of doing assessments. So that worked beautifully. So now we can. I think our next step is going to be, we're going to now go to the other extreme, like a continuous exposure at a high frequency, and then compare the results. And then we're going to work, depending on what we see, we'll work with different combinations of frequency and see whether or not, if we step up from 3.5 in steps of 5 gigahertz, as an example, do we see a sweet spot? And that's going to be really valuable for folks. And again, so one thing that we didn't talk about in the study design is, we can separate out the thermal effect, which is a huge.
That's important.
That's a lot of, particularly when you get these higher frequencies where the tissue penetrance will be very low, but the energy at the surface might be very high. And and that's not an issue with zebrafish, right? We control the environment temperature precisely, like within 0.5 degrees Celsius. So there is no heating of these animals. It's all handled homeostatic.
Yeah, that's a big issue. That really is. When I was talking about that mountaintop site, we had a mountaintop site on Black Mountain in Nevada, and this is when the inception of MCI used to be MCI air signaling, long distance. Remember them?
Oh yeah.
When they would put up a new parabolic dish and not put that bongo drum skin on it, birds would land on the transmitter arm. And when they would get right in that focal point, literally within like 30 seconds, they just fall dead. Boom.
Yep.
So, and that was from the thermal effect, because they were
Correct.
literally getting cooked like you would in a microwave when they were in that sweet spot of the focal point. Are you seeing anything at all? I hate to even ask you this question, because I know that as a scientist, you are opposed to guessing anything. Everything has to fit the rigors of science and proven, and not just once, but twice and 3 times reproducibility. Are you expecting to coast through this over the next, let's say 5, 6, 7 years? You start going into 60 gigs, because that's the end point of 5G. Are you worried at all about what you're going to find?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I don't like to guess, but I'm going to go into each experiment with an open mind, and that's it's interesting. Some of the feedback I was getting when the paper came out is you hear this too. I'm sure the skepticism. There's so much skepticism of who do you trust, and so I don't want to ever weigh into this guessing game at all. I'm going to define exactly how we do the studies and interpret them with the best available tools. That being said, the fact that we saw some evidence, the startle response, I'm definitely excited to take a peek at these additional frequencies. It suggests to me that there is an interaction that had a consequence. That is it going to be worse, or is it going to disappear at the higher wavelengths? I don't know, but it tells me that in a non-thermal dependent manner, our exposures that we did in this system did produce a mild effect, but it is an effect that we definitely believe. So I think honestly, our more of our molecular biology experiments that we're doing right now are really exciting, because we're going to be able to try to explore those mechanisms I talked about earlier. What is the evidence that, say, the genome is responding to these exposures? And if it is responding,
and that leads me to this question.
Yep.
At some point in time, you're going to have to start looking at transgenerational effects. So, we expose these little zebrafish to this, but now let's track their next 3 offspring lines and see if this continues on.
Yep, we're on it already. So that's exactly the tool. We do that routinely in the lab for chemical exposures. And again, the advantages of this system, you can get to the next generation and the next generation pretty readily. Large numbers of animals in a very controlled way. And then the assessments that we read are, again, they're the ones that I mentioned earlier, learning, memory, anxiety, social behavior, respiration, cardiovascular function. We can test these in generations of animals, the offspring, the grandchildren of the exposed subjects. So that's what we can do. And so we have a huge laboratory here, so we can do those types of studies routinely.
Is anyone else doing what you're doing, Robyn?
There were a couple other zebrafish papers overseas, and I'm not criticizing anyone. They were done a while ago, and they were at these lower frequencies that you described. So in fact, they're less relevant for current deployment. But so I'm not sure if they're still working in this area. There were some control issues in some of those studies that I'm sure they could correct if they did them again. As far as we know, no, nobody else is doing this. And in fact, I do a lot of work with the National Institutes of Health, and there isn't a lot of research, honestly, across the NIH institutes investigating this. And it's interesting. So we didn't have any funding for this. I have kind of seed money that I develop in my own group here to do these studies, and we are going to seek funding to do these more comprehensive and longer term studies, and maybe we'll get some enthusiasm from NIH in those directions. But
I'm worried that you're not going to get enthusiasm. I'm worried that you're going to get pushed into a corner, and here's why. All the really previous to this discussion, and I'm really excited about what you're working on, because it's really a way to test and take the guesswork out of what is really happening here with exposure. But when you look at all the really good research done on RF exposure. It's coming out of Sweden and Norway. It's coming out of Scandinavia because they've been exposed to cell phones way before anybody else, right? Nokia started there.
That's right.
But also countries like Bahrain, the United Arab Emirates, they're doing this research. And when I see those studies, because, we try to get them on the show, but the time difference is hard. Like my next guest is in Australia, I believe. Like, it's in the middle of the night there. God bless her for wanting to be on the show today. But it's hard to get these people on the show. And when I look for American publishers of these kind of papers, I just don't see it. And it scares me. Like, why? Like, these damn things are so ubiquitous now. Why isn't it? Hey, shouldn't we know? Shouldn't we know?
And you touched on something that again, I still work in the nano area, and I think there's a lot of parallels, honestly. And see if you agree with this. Certainly the impact of this particular technology is irrefutable, right? In terms of seeding the technical revolution, the new industrial revolution, which is going to, the jobs of the future and the economy. So we certainly see the benefit. And I think oftentimes, you probably agree, that's all you really focus on, right? What would we do if we had to stop it, for example? I don't want to play that game, but I do think that influences some of the investments in exploratory research. If there's a potential threat on technology from discovering adverse health effects. So it's this yin and yang of regulatory versus product development that will always be there healthily. It's good for the economy, but I don't know that there's an active force that's diminishing investigations, but often the public drives it. The public drives the interest,
right?
And then eventually, funding agencies can come around. I would say that happened with the bisphenol A, if you were into that controversy. Very similar, very little.
Replaced with another bisphenol that's just bad for your endocrine system.
We work in that area as well, and but that's an example where the public concern, which is much more effective, as you suggested, in Europe. The precautionary principle in Europe is so much stronger that citizens would like the companies and or the government to prove something is safe before it's used. And we have the flip side in the US, right? This is such great technology. Let's get it out there and see what happens.
Yeah.
And then the agencies have to prove that these technologies are hazardous. And then you're chasing, like you said, the replacements. Oh, well, I guess we found out that was bad. Let's try this. And then wait 10 years to get the data and say, oh, that one was bad. So,
well, and what's even worse is when they find out something's bad, they don't just shut the spigot off. They have years to replace it with something else. So we continue to be exposed to it for years anyway.
Exactly.
And it's really sad. I mean, like the show I'm going to do after your interview, we're going to talk about the presence of plastic in fish. I love fish, but there's this level of angst we live with. Like I never put my phone to my head. I had an experience. We were putting up a 1/4 kilowatt transmitter on Mount Potosi into a 10 dB folded dipole antenna. Mm-hmm. And I accidentally grabbed one of the dipoles when the transmitter keyed. I didn't feel anything. But later that evening, my hand split wide open like a ballpark frank on a grill. And it literally cooked from the inside out. And I knew where it came from because I remembered holding that thing, and Jack Crowley, my technician, was keying it. And he goes, "Oh, we got full power coming through." When he said that, I thought, "Oh, I better not hold that." But so we don't see RF, so we don't care about it. We don't care about it.
Yeah, but honestly, I agree with you. But think about the chemical universe. We talk about the soup of. I mean, the chemical universe is far greater, and we also see that, and we tend to ignore that as well. And we're a strange species, right? We only worry about the things that we can see, when the things that you can't see are often quite hazardous.
Well, you know what it is? We are selfish. We don't want to give up anything. We don't want to give up anything. It's like I don't want to give up my phone. It makes my life easier, but at the same time, I'm cautious. I don't put it against my head when I take calls. I'm always on speakerphone. I don't carry it. When I put it in my pocket, I put it on airplane mode. I mean, I'm probably unique to the population, but that's because I spent a decade in RF, mobile telephone, paging, and cellular phone.
Right.
I was at the first cellular telephone conference in Las Vegas, Nevada at the Land Mobile Radio Show when Motorola came in to show their new cellular system.
What year was that?
That was 1985, 86.
Wow.
And see, we already had 800 and 900 megahertz trunking radios,
right,
that preceded cellular. And I remember when the first Motorola 8000 came out, it looked like a pocket fisherman. It had a coaxial mast of 12 inches long, and then it had this little antenna on the top. And I remember talking to one of the engineers from Motorola, and I said, "What's with this antenna?" And he goes, "Well, some of our early research showed that in rodents, the direct radiation to the eye could cause premature cataracts. So we want to get the RF away from your head." And I remember thinking, what? Wait, what? Are you serious? Like, oh my God. So, it's been in the back of my mind for a long time about RF, but you're right. We are probably more assaulted by the chemicals that we willingly put in our mouth to enjoy our vegetables. You're absolutely right. It's really sad, isn't it? Do you cringe? Like, do you have angst? Like, oh my God, like what can I do? What can I do that's not going to kill me?
Yeah, I try not to get paralyzed by that, right? Some of it is, it's going to come with a modern society, and we can't doubt that some of these chemicals in our lives, like you said, the phone has massively improved human experience. Lifespan has actually increased, although it's decreased in the U.S., but that's for different reasons. So certainly chemicals have really made life possible for modern humans, but that doesn't mean all chemicals should be assumed to be equally positive. And I do think there are a lot of forces in the U.S. which are really trying to get more on top of this, and don't let people just be driven by, oh, look what this technology does, and just forget about the adverse effects. It's going to be minor. So I think the new generation of young people are more demanding of safety, which is great. And I do honestly think going away from industrial work to more technological is actually could lead to much safer environments. So not to mention the cleanup of water and air is being assisted by some of the same technology. So I don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater, but that doesn't mean assume everything is safe.
We're going to take our last commercial break.
Okay.
With Robyn Tanguay, and we will wrap it up with her in just a second. Stay tuned. We'll be right back with more Superhuman Radio. I love beef. And if you love beef, listen up. I've discovered the best tasting beef in the world, and that's not an exaggeration, at Piedmontese.com. The Piedmontese breed is famous from Italy for being lean and unbelievably tender, with half the fat and calories of traditional beef. Even typically tough cuts are tender when it comes from the Piedmontese cows. And for the first time ever, Piedmontese cows are being raised here in the USA. Get 25% off all beef and free shipping on orders of $100 or more at Piedmontese.com with code SHR. Go to PIEDMONTESE.com and use code SHR today. You will never eat any other type of beef ever again. Whether your goal is to build muscle or burn fat, you'll find everything you need at Redcon One. Need help getting a good night's sleep? Try Fade Out, or the most popular pre-workout supplement on the market today, Total War. Sign up for their new Transformation Challenge and win $10,000, or shop for apparel that people at the gym will know that you are serious about your training. Need a testosterone booster that works? Check out Boomstick. Whatever you need, you'll find the best quality supplements on the market at Redcon One. Go to redcon1.com. That's REDCON1.com, or go to superhumanradio.net and click the Redcon One banner ads today. Chronic stress leaves us tired, distracted, and physically vulnerable. Apollo Neuro is here to help you take control. Apollo Neuro is a new wearable that trains your nervous system to be more resilient to stress. Apollo's gentle vibrations use your sense of touch to help you recover from stress, going from fight or flight to rest and digest, so you can relax, get to sleep, focus, and stay healthy. Developed by physicians and neuroscientists, Apollo Neuro has been tested in multiple clinical trials and is proven to improve heart rate variability, the key biometric of stress. Special offer for friends of Superhuman Radio. Try Apollo Neuro today and get 15% off your purchase at apolloneuro.com/superhuman. That's APOLLONEURO.com/superhuman. Do you remember those delicious toaster pastries you had when you were a kid? You know, the rectangular sugar-filled snacks? Well, guess what? Legendary Foods has just made low-carb toaster pastry. This is the first of its kind, and honestly, these things are amazing. They have 3 to 4 net carb, less than 1 gram of sugar, and 9 grams of protein. You can eat them right out of the wrapper or lightly toast them. The only question is, which flavor, strawberry or brown sugar cinnamon? They're available at eatlegendary.com and Amazon.
New Mass Pro Synthogen X2 just upped its own legendary game. To distance itself even further from the rest of the pack, Synthogen X2 now has double the key active ingredients. If you've ever wondered what steroid-like recovery feels like, Synthogen X2 delivers. See why others compare it favorably to powerful bodybuilding drugs at synthogen.com. Mass Pro Synthogen. When you train with it, you'll gain with it. Unlock your potential with the best cognitive enhancement and anti-aging supplements on the market. PureNootropics.net goes the extra mile for the highest quality ingredients, third-party tested to make sure you only receive the best your money can buy. There's no better choice with their money-back guarantee and free shipping. Try their best-selling DHM. Dihydromycetin prevents hangovers and helps deliver detox after a night of drinking. Get your DHM and other nootropics and longevity supplements from PureNootropics.net, the purest supplements around.
You're listening to the Superhuman Channel. Don't hate us because we feel good.
Welcome back. We're talking with Robyn Tanguay from Oregon State. I'm really excited about what you're working on. And I hope you enjoyed being on the show because I definitely want to have you back. I'm very excited about your work. I'm very excited about what it will bring into focus here. And I'm worried for you. I'm worried for you because this is a big thing. And people are going to want to squelch you. Good word to use in the radio business. They're going to want to squelch you if your research starts coming out and going, no bueno, things we need to think about this.
Yeah, we're prepared for that. And again, we've worked with lots of controversial areas, and that's why if we stay true to the science, I can't completely control what other people do with it, right? That's the unfortunate aspect of openness of science. But yeah, you're right. We're concerned, and some of the comments I got through various blogs, et cetera, and social media, I see some of that coming already, but we can handle it.
Yeah, because your early analysis, and I have to be honest, I'm guilty of that as well. Your early analysis showed, like, hey, there's really not a whole lot to worry about, and I was like, oh, come on, because I understand RF. There's got to be more to this, but the reality is that you're not really you haven't put your stamp on this and said, hey, there's nothing to worry about.
Yeah, I'm glad you got that. And we were and if people read it, that's the danger of when people grab headlines.
Between the press release and this study. You know how many times I've had authors of studies on this show based on a press release, and they were like, no, that's not what we found.
Yeah, exactly. And we were, it's a short article, and we were very clear to say, under these conditions, this frequency, this is what we found. And we even highlighted and hinted at what we're doing now, right? With these animals, I alluded to the fact that we're looking at the effects in the adults. We're looking at the effects at the gene level. We're looking at next generation effects. So, and we're going to be doing that again with other frequencies. So, I think when people just try to stay objective, and point out, it's like, that's a great, like you said, Carl, it's like, this is a good first step. Now I'd like to see you do this. I think that's right. The type of dialogue we'd like to have with other scientists, the industry, and the public. And, we will defend our science, but that doesn't mean it's comprehensive yet.
So one of the things that you may or may not be interested in looking at, but I really do believe it has a pronounced and profound effect on human health. And that is, it's pretty evident that being exposed to RF, there's numerous studies. One of them was if you take a cell phone call a half hour before you go to bed, it pushes back deep sleep. Deep sleep latency is prolonged by about an hour. And sleep is a huge contributor to just about every disease of modernity today.
That's absolutely true. Yep.
Can you look at the effects of RF on the brain of the zebrafish, not for long-term
Understood,
outcomes,
yeah.
but in situ? Like, wow, they don't sleep good when we have these things on.
Yeah, even better than that, I think. And we're working on with another company on a technology that we think will be able to image neuronal brain activity in real time. So imagine the capability if we could, and it's done through some light indicators, basically. So you can actually look very closely at the brain, and if certain regions of the brain show differential activity from the exposure, we can detect it in the live animal. It's kind of like the high-end imaging you do in humans. You can't really do those studies effectively in humans. So it's possible that, again, those would be in the adults. I think I would do that in adults to capture some of the phenomenon you're talking about. You get the animals, you immobilize them, and then you image the neuronal activity while they're being exposed to various frequencies. And it's a good idea. We can model those types of activities.
I just came up with another one. We're all so into the microbiome today. There are early studies that show that exposure to certain frequencies can shift the diversity of bacteroidetes to firmicutes and vice versa. And we know that our microbiome has a role in health. It even has a role. It even has a role in hormone production. We know that people with higher levels of not L-plantarum, of L-reuteri produce more oxytocin. Oxytocin is the bonding hormone, makes you less threatening and so on. So I would love to see you start to look at, do zebrafish have microbiome?
Yeah. We have another collaborator here that we work with the influence of various exposures on microbiome development in zebrafish and the impact on behavior and other health outcomes. So we're already working in that area, and my postdoc is very interested in pursuing that. We have, again, the advantages of this model, because the mechanisms we think are the same. We can explore those types of observations as well. And we have a few papers out. Dr. Tom Sharpton is my collaborator, and he's demonstrated that the compositional changes that occur from certain diets in humans, say if you alter the zinc level in diets, the function of the microbiomes in human and zebrafish shift in very similar ways. So there's really strong evidence that what we learn in zebrafish would be relevant to humans as well. So yeah, it's not a bad idea. And
so exciting. I'm so excited. I know you're going to be back on the show. So when is your next leg of research scheduled for? Are you already working on some things?
Yeah, we're already working on, bringing out these animals from this study to adulthood. Those should be complete within a month or two. And then the additional exposures, COVID kind of slowed down the campus because we can't get into some of these laboratories, but it's starting to open up. So we'll be investigating the other frequencies that we discussed earlier very, very soon.
I want to help champion your work, Rob.
Well, I appreciate that.
I really want to have you back on the show. So will you stay in touch with Elisa so we can be right on it when you're ready to release something new?
Yep, sounds great.
Thanks for being here. You have a great weekend. The weekend's right upon us now, so have a great weekend, okay?
Right. Enjoy the conversation. Yep, goodbye.
Take care. We're going to take one quick commercial break. When we come back, we're going to talk about something equally important. We all love fish. I love fish. I try to eat as much fish as possible. But how much plastic am I getting if I'm eating a lot of fish? We're going to talk about that with my next guest. So stay tuned. We'll be right back with more Superhuman Radio. You've heard me talk about the chill pill on the show and how effective it is at helping people who suffer from social anxiety, or sometimes when you just want to take the edge off to a long, stressful day. Well, listen to this story from Dylan Goutreau.
Definitely takes anxiety away, which I have a long history of having. Started out at 2 milligrams a day of Xanax. That was at 8 years old. And so I stopped using benzos 3 years ago. Extremely difficult. Yeah, so I spent about 3 years trying to find anything and everything I could that would be healthy for me. So to help with anxiety, because I'm talking, full out panic attack. The chill pill was the first thing that I found that actually in the middle of a panic attack I can take, and it definitely subsides.
Go to drseeds.com. That's DRSEEDS.com. Use coupon code SHR and save 20% off your first bottle of the chill pill. Check it out. I promise this is one supplement that delivers. Did you know that your gut is referred to as your second brain? In fact, at least 90% of your serotonin, your happiness chemical, is created in your gut. If you don't take care of your gut, you won't feel good, period. Bioptimizers recently released Cognibiotics, a new breakthrough probiotic formula that is clinically proven to enhance your brain function, your mood, and overall mental health. Most probiotics often include conflicting strains or quantities and can cancel each other out. Cognibiotics delivers the exact strain you need in exactly the right ratios and quantities. With a 365-day, no questions asked, money-back guarantee, you can try them out for yourself to start feeling the incredible difference Cognibiotics makes in your mood, mind, and performance. For an exclusive offer to my listeners, go to cognibiotics.com/SHR. That's COGNIBIOTICS.com/SHR and use code SHR10. Do you remember those delicious toaster pastries you had when you were a kid? You know, the rectangular sugar-filled snacks? Well, guess what? Legendary Foods has just made low-carb toaster pastry. This is the first of its kind, and honestly, these things are amazing. They have 3 to 4 net carb, less than 1 gram of sugar, and 9 grams of protein. You can eat them right out of the wrapper or lightly toast them. The only question is, which flavor? Strawberry or brown sugar cinnamon? They're available at eatlegendary.com and Amazon. Everybody wants to feel better, be healthier and happier. If you don't sweat profusely on a regular basis, you won't feel as good as you could. Studies have shown the power of infrared sauna. Infrared penetrates 1 to 2 inches into the body. It helps those with back pain, fibromyalgia, arthritis, depression, and anxiety. Patients get relief from infrared sauna. The Good Health Sauna has been shown to be an exercise mimetic, conveying many of the same benefits as cardio. There are a lot of reasons people buy a Good Health Sauna, but the bottom line is you will be a much happier, healthier person by using the Good Health Sauna every day. You'll crave it, you'll love it, and it will be the best purchase you have ever made. Good Health Saunas provide commercial-grade saunas for in-home and commercial use, backed by the best lifetime warranty in the industry. Unmatched customer service and the best financing makes owning one easy and will fit any budget. Go to goodhealthsauna.com/superhumanradio to learn more and save 25% off.
Among the easiest and most popular ways to experience the life-altering benefits of hemp, Planet Earth CBD soft gels offer fast-acting effects as they release quickly. Made in a GMP-compliant, US FDA-registered facility, you can count on Planet Earth safe soft gels. These soft gels provide temporary relief from pain and so much more. Manufactured with the calming combination of chamomile and melatonin, you got yourself a long-needed CBD solution. 25 milligrams of nano-emulsified hemp extract per serving with anti-inflammatory agency. Planet Earth sleep-supporting soft gels will have you forgetting about today's worries for a better tomorrow. Unwind with Planet Earth CBD today.
Quest Nutrition makes bars, cookies, chips, and pizzas out of complete dairy-based proteins. Our products minimize net carbs and sugar without sacrificing taste. Each delicious chocolate-flavored chip, cookie chunk, and crunchy crumble is custom-made to maintain Quest macros. It's time to enjoy foods that work for you, not against you. It's time to enjoy your Quest.
This is the Superhuman Channel, doing reps with the weight of the world.
Welcome back to Superhuman Radio. My next guest is Francisca Ribeiro. She is a PhD candidate at the University of Queensland in Australia, but it doesn't look like you're in Australia. That looks like daylight behind you.
Yeah, it is. Hi. I'm actually in Portugal at the moment.
Oh, nice. Because if this was Australia, this is like 3:00 in the morning. So I figured it was going to be dark. We actually have a listener who's actually watching from Australia, a good friend of the show, Walter Edmund. And he goes, Wally in Australia. Sorry, Walter, she's not in Australia. I lied. Anyway,
No, unfortunately not.
Welcome to the show. This is a really important topic. I love fish. I'm Italian. I love to eat fish. And now I'm afraid to eat fish. What prompted this research, Francisca? Why did you do this study? What pointed in this direction, first of all?
Okay, so first of all, the problematic of microplastics that we hear on the news every day. So they are in nearly every ecosystem on Earth. So we were absolutely sure that we would find it in seafood. But the major reason was really because the methodology that we have nowadays to fine microplastic in seafood samples is not the best one in terms of concentration. So what I mean by this is that we would have to isolate the particles one by one in a fish, for example, and
Right.
it takes too long, it's very time consuming, and it doesn't really gives a concentration at the end. So it doesn't give us a result in milligrams or something like that. It just gives you the number of particles.
Yeah.
So that was the major reason, trying to develop a technique, and especially on seafood, that would allow us to quantify.
So where are these microparticles coming from, Francisca? Is this just plastic? You know, we throw away plastic every day in our garbage cans, and people don't realize, but a lot of times it ends up in the ocean, it ends up in landfills. Does it break down into these microparticles and then get picked up into the water?
Yeah, exactly. So this plastic can reach the ocean, let's put it that way, by several ways. So it can be either from plastic waste, so people don't dispose the plastic as they should by recycling, and so, or they leave the plastic at the beach, let's put this scenario. And then once the plastic is there, by the action of what we call weathering agents, so it can be either sunlight, so UV light, wave action, the animals itself.
The sand, just rubbing against the sand. Like
yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. So all of that contributes that in time, this plastic will break into smaller and smaller pieces until it gets to.
Are we talking about microns in size?
Exactly. So by definition, a microplastic is a particle with less than 5 millimeters. So everything that is below that size until 100 nanometers, let's say.
That's actually pretty big. 5 millimeters is pretty big. I mean, that's something you can hold in your hand and see.
Yeah. So that's something you can see, but then it can go up to 20 microns, 10 microns, 5 microns. Yeah. Right. And then it can get to the nano size. So now we are talking about nanometers in size. Yeah.
So how are fish absorbing this? Is it going through their gills when they're breathing and they're absorbing it passively? Are they eating it? How do the fish incorporate it into their flesh?
Yeah, so if we're talking about fish specifically, they can uptake it through the gills, for instance, by breathing in the water, or through the mouth by drinking seawater. But if we are talking about marine invertebrates, for instance, like clams or mussels, they do it in a passive way. So they uptake it as well through the gills or ingest it through the mouth. But because they are filter feeders, most commonly, the particles are uptaken in a passive way. Yeah. If we are talking about larger animals, like whales, for instance, the biggest problem is not the microplastics, but the plastic itself. So the big plastics, and they uptake it because they eat it, because they are in the water column. Yeah.
So now this is all ocean fish you looked at. You looked at oysters, you looked at prawns, you looked at squid, crabs, and sardines. And these were all from Australian markets, right? These were already caught fish. So these would be fish that people would buy and bring home and cook for their families, right?
That's right. Yeah.
Did you look at lake? Did you look at different other waterways at all? Like because I have to believe that catfish in rivers, because they eat all the poop that the other fish make, and they eat the dirt, and they have to have a lot of plastic in them too. Do you look at the more closed waterways, the rivers and streams and stuff like that?
No, so we haven't looked at that, but there are other studies on river species and other animals, a lot of studies actually worldwide. And yeah, they are also found in fish from rivers or from lakes, especially the catfish. I can't tell if there is any study on that, but I'm absolutely sure they should have plastic in them.
Oh, sure.
Yeah, absolutely. But yeah, other studies, especially with bivalves from freshwater sediments, they all had plastic in them. Yeah, but we only looked at species from the ocean.
So talk about the concentrations of plastic you found in the different diversity of fish here. You found plastic anywhere from 0.4 milligrams all the way up to 2.9 milligrams. And that was in sardines, which everybody eats sardines because they don't get mercury, because they're young and they're small. But meanwhile, they have more plastic in them.
Yeah, that's right. So this was the most surprising result of this study. We weren't expecting this at all. Our guess here is because we only process the edible portion of each seafood species. So in the case of sardines, it was the mussel, but with the skin on. And because we didn't know, so until the point we got the result is when we realized that this was the species with the biggest concentration. And so our guess in the study is that this plastic is probably coming from the packaging materials that we use to transport the fish, or even on the boat. Yeah, so that's our guess, because now we would have to test the sardines without the skin, for instance, and taking all the measures that we can to avoid the contamination of the skin.
But could it be that the skin bioaccumulates at a higher rate? We know the skin bioaccumulates mercury at a higher rate than the flesh. Could it just be that it wasn't from the passive contact in the packaging, but in fact sardines bioaccumulate more plastics in the skin? Maybe the body is trying to push it out and get it out.
Yeah, I mean, it's an idea. We really haven't tested that, because one of the things that hasn't been proven in the scientific community is whether or not the fish can actually uptake the particles through the blood and then to the muscle. So we really don't know if they actually can first bioaccumulate into the muscle and then into the skin. That's why at the moment we can't really guess if it's happening or not. But if we look at the other species in this study, the levels were much lower in oysters or prawns, where we were expecting it to be much higher, because with oysters, we eat them whole and we analyze the entire animal, and the concentration was actually very low compared to the sardines. So it must be some kind of external factor that is contaminating these samples. One way that we could do this in the future would be catching a fish straight from the sea to our lab, so without using any packaging materials made of plastic. But that's what we are aiming to do. Could it
also be that plastic stratifies in water? So maybe the bivalves and the things that lived in the sand, they just don't get as exposed to it because it floats a little bit up higher. And these are the fish that are moving through the water that tend to be exposed to it more.
Yeah, exactly. It can be. So different plastics have different densities. Some float, others don't. So yeah, that's a possibility. Yeah, the difference in water column. We actually hypothesized that the value that we find in squid, that was actually very low, is because of that, because squid live in deeper areas of the ocean. So we assume that most of the plastic stays in the first 100 meters and then less as you go low. But yeah, we really don't know.
So do we see any anomalies with fish that we can attribute to the plastic that they are now incorporating into their physiology, whether it's their skin or their muscle or their blood or whatever? Do we see things happening to fish that we can say, well, this makes sense because fish are loaded with plastic and they have these problems now?
Yeah, so there are more studies on marine invertebrates and the effects of microplastics to these animals, because it's easier to assess those effects in these species. But in fish, it has caused some mortality in some cases where the concentration is very high. And one of the biggest problems is because fish eat plastic and then they get very full, and so they can't eat anymore because the plastic is not digested.
It doesn't break down, right?
Exactly. So it stays in the stomach and then it just causes a block of the digestive system. So that's what has been, that I think that's the bigger effect that we have seen so far in fish. Yeah. If we are talking about organisms at the base of the trophic chain, like oysters, for instance, you see bigger effects in terms of, once again, mortality, but then in terms of neurotoxicity or oxidative damage or that kind of cell-based effects compared to fish.
Sardines, eating a serving of sardines could potentially deliver 30 milligrams of plastic to the person eating them. That's startling to me. We're not talking about micrograms here. We're talking about milligrams.
Milligrams, yeah. So 30 milligrams is about a grain of rice. So you have an idea. Here we have considered a serving of 3 sardines, so medium sardines, based on the Australian guidelines. But yeah, and this is just calculated based on an average person, an average seafood eater. There can be a lot of factors that can influence this result, but it should be about that based on what we found in our samples. Yes.
And I know that humans bioaccumulate plastic. We don't have a good way to get rid of it. I mean, if it's in our digestive tract, we will eliminate it with other things. But if it finds its way into tissue, we don't have a system to deal with plastic. And so it's going to stay with us for a long time.
Well, it probably does. Once again, there are no studies on humans yet. So we really don't know what is going on with us at the moment. We don't know if we are ingesting, so where does it go? But there are some preliminary studies on additives of the plastic, for instance, and that we know that it's found in our blood, urine samples. So
right.
It's likely that can happen with the plastic as well. Yeah.
Well, and when we talk about plastics, right, we use this word and it's this ubiquitous term, and it really doesn't mean, plastic. But plasticizers, the chemicals that they use to make plastic, one in particular, phthalates, was identified almost 15 years ago as an anti-androgen. It has an affinity for the androgen receptor, and then it blocks DHEA, testosterone, and DHT from actually binding with the androgen receptor. And it's been associated in communities where there's high phthalate exposure because of chemical waste and so on. Young boys are born with testicles that don't drop. We see young women more prone to PCOS. So when we say this word plastic, it's like, plastic. I swallowed a piece of plastic when I was a kid. I was chewing on my car toy, and but the plasticizers in plastic act like hormones in our body. They have been linked to, they're called xenoestrogens and xenoandrogens for a reason. They're synthetic mimickers of sex hormones. So this is really a big deal. This is not something to just go, so you eat a little plastic. It's not a good thing.
No, and I absolutely agree with you. I don't think people have realized yet the issue and what kind of effects it can actually cause. And I'm not even talking about the environment, because that we can already see. Our beach is full of plastic, for instance. But in terms of human health, yeah, it can actually be a big impact in the future. And if we don't stop it now, or if we don't find alternatives as the bioplastic that some companies are producing at the moment, it will become a bigger problem in the future. And I think we have to do everything we can to at least reduce and manage our waste the best way as possible as we can. Yeah.
Do you think that there's higher exposure to fish in other regions of the globe? If we look at countries like China, which are some of the worst offenders for polluting their water, we would expect to see their fish has more plastic incorporated into it. Would that be a fair assessment?
Yeah, absolutely. I would say so, especially because Although we don't have comparative studies with our own because the method we used is different, we can actually see that the concentration that we found in Australian species is lower than other studies from other species from other countries of the globe. So yeah, I would definitely say yes. We can't say that there is a directly relation between what you find in the water, for instance, and what you find in a fish, but it's definitely a proxy for environmental contamination of the area where you sample. Yeah.
Does this give us more reason to improve fish farming? So, right now, a lot of fish farms, they put nets up in the ocean, and they raise the fish in the ocean in these nets where the water is coming and going from the ocean. And this is thought to be better than these stagnant pools of water inside buildings and so on and so forth. But I'm starting to wonder if it is better. I'm starting to think that maybe fish farming, it needs to be reinvestigated and improved upon so that the quality of fish grown in fish farms is better and we have more control on the exposure to plastic. What do you think?
Yeah, absolutely. So aquaculture is one of the biggest sources of plastic to the fish as well, because they, as you said, they grow in ponds and then they use fish nets to catch the fish. But I totally understand why plastic is used, because it's very resistant and it has a high durability, and it's very difficult to find a material that can compete with that. So I totally understand why it's used. But like I said, investing in research in other plastic-related materials, but that are better for the environment and for our own health would be a solution. Definitely, yeah.
So, Francisca, do you eat fish?
I eat fish, but
you used to eat fish, or you still eat fish?
I still eat fish. But I think it has to be, at least we need to know what is in there. And I never say to people to panic now, because we need more studies to confirm this and to understand where the contamination is coming from to start. But as a suggestion, I would recommend to avoid any plastic materials in your kitchen. For instance, try to wash your fish as much as you can with water, and don't eat the skin. That would be my advice. But the most important is don't use plastic bags. Don't use any utensils in our kitchen that can actually contaminate and increase the concentration of plastic that might already be in there. But don't panic just now. That would be my advice.
Well, and there's another aspect that we haven't even discussed, and that is the changes that plastic undergoes when heated. And so, we're talking about fish, we're talking about plastic, and we're talking about it in this pristine environment where the fish is raw and we're counting how much plastic is in there. But then we take that fish and we put it on a grill and we heat it up, and the 3 milligrams of plastic in there melts and turns into other chemicals. Some of them we know are known carcinogens. And I'm starting to wonder if the Japanese have it right. Maybe we should just be eating the fish raw and not cooking it. Maybe that's one less bad step with the fish.
Yeah, that's right. But actually, once the plastic is in the environment and obviously stays there for many, many years, it actually suffers a chemical modification in the environment as well. So the plastic is no longer pristine once it gets to the fish. So the weathering happens in the environment. So I couldn't tell that if it's safer or not to cook it, especially because I don't know if you ever tried to melt plastic, but it's actually very difficult to do that. It's highly resistant to temperatures and pressure. For our method, we have to use 180 degrees and a huge pressure to actually fragment that part of plastic and melt it.
Wow.
Yeah.
This is fascinating stuff, but it's also worrisome because, people nowadays, they walk down the aisle at the grocery store and they're told, well, no, shop the perimeter, the meat, the fish, the fresh vegetables. But now we're learning more and more about the meat and the fish and the fresh vegetables. That's really not that good. And people are thinking to themselves, what do I eat? What can I eat that's not going to hurt me? And it's becoming harder and harder to find those answers today.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, everything is contaminated really at the moment. So that's why I say if you can avoid extra contamination by plastic, that's the better solution that we can give at the moment. Yeah.
This is fascinating stuff, Francisca. I think this is good work that you're doing because it opens people's eyes. And maybe we need to start thinking about ways to take additional precautions when buying fish, when preparing fish, and when eating fish. Because, you know, if there was a period of my life where I ate a pound of salmon every single day for years. I ate a pound of beef, I ate a pound of salmon every single day for years. And, you know, and you think about that. I don't know, maybe salmon has less plastic than sardines, maybe more. But when you eat a pound, maybe I'm getting 30, 40 milligrams of plastic a day every day for years. And who knows what impact that has on my health? I have no idea. Because it's such a small thing over the course of time. You don't notice the changes, that if it was something acute that you get it and you go, oh my God, I don't feel good. You know, it's just small nagging erosion to your health that happens over time. And it's very worrisome to me. I've actually been talking to a good friend of mine about something very absurd. So I am getting ready to write a document, my first serious document. Aubrey de Grey came up with the mitochondrial theory of aging. Lots of people have theories of aging. The newest one is the senescent cells. We accumulate senescent cells and that leads to aging. Maybe you've heard of this before. Yeah. I'm convinced it's something completely different. I'm convinced that it's the bioaccumulation of metabolic waste products in tissue that get deposited in muscle tissue and organ tissue year after year after year. And then the organs become less functional because the tissue is less functional. The mitochondria actually stop working properly because they're congested with garbage. Muscles become stiff because they're not pliable because you have all this metabolic debris being stored in muscle tissue. We know that this happens with iron. We know that we accumulate iron and it leads to all sorts of problems later on in life. And so I'm convinced now that, and I know from research that I've done years ago, that everything we eat has a metabolic consequence. Carbohydrates, acellular carbohydrates like flours and sugars, they create instant inflammation in the body. Fats and proteins, not as bad, but they do. So everything we eat sustains life, but everything we eat takes a little bit of life away from us at the same time. And I was talking to a friend of mine a couple of weeks ago, and I said, how could we get nutrition without eating? We did it in our mother's wombs. It's called the umbilical cord. It's called the belly button. What is it? The umbilicus. And I said, man, wouldn't it be fascinating if we learned that we could, remember the movie Avatar? The movie Avatar? Remember they had the tail that plugged in and they got their life force from it? Maybe we're going to figure out that we can tap back into the umbilicus and start giving ourselves nutrition and removing waste products without eating it someday. Wouldn't that be fascinating?
Yeah, in a way, yeah. But then you wouldn't have the pleasure of eating, and that's an important factor as well, isn't it?
You can eat once in a while still. You know, you can still eat.
Okay. That's the deal then.
You unplug and you go to a restaurant that night. But anyway, listen, this is fascinating. I really want to thank you for taking time to come on the show today.
No problem. Thanks for having me.
Okay, take care. And that's it for today. Tomorrow we have a special show. We have a return of the Pep Talk. We have Dr. Elizabeth Yurt coming on tomorrow to talk about an exciting mitochondrial peptide that may be the answer for those of you who suffer from chronic fatigue, and it's called SS31. It's an injectable peptide. I'll tell you where you can get it. I'll tell you how to dose it and tell you what it can do for you. So that's tomorrow, and that's at a special time. That's going to be at 2:30 Eastern instead of 1 o'clock Eastern. Dr. Yurt will be making a return to Superhuman Radio, and we will have an exciting pep talk tomorrow. So tune in for that. Of course, share the show. If you learned anything today, even if what you learned is that I'm a dummy, especially that eating through the umbilical cord discussion, right? That's pretty far-fetched. Now you're thinking to yourself, Carl's gone. He went off the edge just now. But these are the thoughts I have. What can I say? I'm letting you peek into my brain. It's a scary place. I will see you tomorrow. Share the show, please, and thank you for being here today.